Welcome to the Janus Film Review podcast. We are back once more. It's been a long time, hasn't it, Dan, since we've done one of these?
Been a rather long time, yes, it has to be said.
Yeah, I dread to think how long, but we're back because we have something rather important to talk about.
All good things are worth waiting for.
That's very true, as the saying goes. But yes, we've been waiting for this particular film for a while, as has the rest of the world. Both of us have finally got round to seeing it, and we thought that we would do a complete spoiler-filled, however long this will be, about the latest James Bond film, No Time to Die.
Yes, to explain the sudden move away from our previous commitment to avoiding spoilers, we didn't feel that we could have an honest, full-bore conversation about our respective opinions here regarding this film unless we discarded that previous provision because, well, there's too much to say and too much that cannot be said unless we spoil things. So,
absolutely. That said, if you come to this podcast having not seen the film, we recommend
sodding off right now.
Exactly. Come back when you have watched it because we won't be sparing any information.
No, we're not going to provide. We're just going to talk as it comes. We'll talk about whatever's relevant to whatever part of the discussion we're having. So, we won't cover everything in minute detail, but there are certain grandstand revelations that will be discussed here. So the basic ebb and flow will be spoiled. So you have been warned.
Exactly. It's well documented going back to the beginning of this film that there was a long wait anyway for any kind of announcement of a follow-up to Spectre, which was the last film, 2015. Daniel Craig famously saying he'd rather slash his wrists than make another Bond film, but as later went on to say that was 2 days after he'd finished filming, and it had been a bit of a rough ride for him.
So he was having a little linguistic tantrum.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but I think there was a long time to wait, and I will admit, I would be first to admit that I was beginning to think that Daniel Craig had outstayed his welcome. It was time for him to move on. He'd never, particularly to me, seemed completely happy even being in the role. It seemed a bit of a chore.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I think one must always look back to how he came into it. I mean, he was not a popular choice. There was the infamous web handle that was used. Daniel Craig is not Bond, and all people could talk about is him being blonde and all the other bits and pieces that when he was cast back in 2005, I think it was, they actually announced it. It was not by any means a universally well-received choice. There was a lot of skepticism. I mean, there'd really only been one film where he had demonstrated the kind of presence and charisma that you would associate with Bond, and that was Matthew Vaughan's Layer Cake, which is a very fun little British gangster film.
2004, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And you can see in that the kind of genesis, the nucleus of an interpretation of Bond. But that was the first clear indication that we had seen on screen that this man might be able to pull it off. I think with the benefit of hindsight, we were thinking in rather linear terms, and that is that Daniel Craig would be another straightforward, fully formed iteration of the character. But of course, that wasn't what we were going to get.
No. Yeah, and famously, Sam Mendes, who later went on to direct Daniel Craig in 2 films, claimed that that he was one of those people that thought he was the wrong choice. Yeah. I think back to Casino Royale, there was talk of boycotting it. People weren't going to go and see it. Yeah. But the proof is in the pudding, I suppose. And he, under those circumstances of knowing that he wasn't going to be, wasn't loved, wasn't well liked to start with, he made a film that has gone on to become a modern classic in the Bond franchise, and many people would hold it, in high esteem.
Yeah, we can't underestimate as well the emotional connection that the whole concept of Bond, as well as the fan base, had to Casino Royale as a story, because it is the original Ian Fleming Bond novel. So that in itself meant that there was so much riding on Daniel Craig's first film that it either needed to be all in or it was going to be a disaster. And as you pointed out, history would tell us that Casino Royale was a significant success. So this is the backdrop. This is basically where we are emphasizing that Daniel Craig, as much as he's been criticized for being a bit of a misery guts at various points over his years in the role, it was not should we say, a happy beginning for him. So I think sort of one begets the other, if you know what I mean. So
yeah, there was a recent. Well, there is a documentary. I think it's on Apple TV, Being James Bond. I don't know if you've seen it, Dan.
I haven't.
No, it's worth a watch. It's basically all about Daniel Craig's tenure. It's a conversation between him, Michael G. Wilson, and Barbara Broccoli, the producers of Bond, talking about his iteration of the character and you know, from the beginnings to now. And it certainly seems that Daniel Craig kind of, as the years have gone by, suddenly being thrown into this, you know, worldwide global fame, relaxed into the role. And so, as we will come to in No Time to Die, seems absolutely feet under the table, absolutely enjoying it.
Well, it's an appropriate segue, really, because referring to Barbara Broccoli, because she has always been Daniel Craig's staunchest supporter. She was absolutely committed to the idea of him playing the character, and seems to be sort of very protective of him.
Yeah.
And she would argue, certainly based on the box office success and the overall popularity of the films that Craig has helmed as the principal star and as James Bond, the success they've had, she would consider herself vindicated. But I would contend that the scale of that relationship is quite possibly the only reason why Daniel Craig as James Bond would be allowed to go in the direction that No Time to Die has taken him.
A lot of other commentators have said it seems to be Daniel Craig saying goodbye to the role, you know, so it's more more about him than it is about the character of James Bond. And that leads me on to a thought I had, which was, I can't think of another Bond film where we, as the audience, have known that it's the actor's last film.
That's an interesting point. That I think if you were aware of the circumstances surrounding Sean Connery's participation in Diamonds Are Forever, you would probably be safe to make that assumption, which of course it was. But then you have the subplot with Never Say Never Again.
Yeah.
But that's entirely different circumstances. I mean, Connery basically did that final Eon Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever, under duress. So it's not it is not comparable, really.
And it wasn't a film that was tailored to him in sense of it was pointing in the direction of the future of the series. As when Roger Moore took over, it was very much in that mold, rather than saying this is the swan song for our first Bond.
Yeah, it was basically a really bad Roger Moore James Bond movie starring a flabby, unmotivated, and patently disinterested Sean Connery.
Well, that's perhaps another podcast, because that's one of my guilty pleasures. I love Diamonds Are Forever.
But then, isn't that damning it with faint praise, calling it a guilty pleasure?
Well, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, you know, so we talked about Connery. Obviously, when Lazenby took over, the audience, first of all, were getting used to the fact it wasn't Sean Connery, it was the other fella, and they weren't to know that he was only going to be doing one at that point, and he was given bad business advice, as that's, you know, gone down in history, and his agent told him that Bond was gone, it wasn't worth pursuing into the 70s. How wrong he was.
Yes,
then
indeed.
Of course, I suppose the other nearest would be Roger Moore with A View to a Kill, but again,
that wasn't exactly a tailored farewell.
No, it wasn't. Exactly. And I think that's the point I'm making, is that this is definitely, No Time to Die is definitely a film where it is Daniel Craig is leaving the role. Let's send him off, you know, give him a send off in the most final way.
Yeah, I'd like to speculate here, because there was a very strong suggestion that after Spectre and the toil that Daniel Craig evidently feels he experienced making that film.
Yeah.
And then when the attempts to get another film underway, all the usual negotiations, it all got rather mired pretty rapidly and started to drag on almost immediately. There was some suggestion that Craig would just throw his hands up in the air and say, no, I don't want to do it. And again, I think that Daniel Craig has been indulged as an actor via the James Bond series more than any other actor who has ever played the role.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, for example, and again, I'm just thinking out loud, I'm not sure that Cubby Broccoli would have put up with the amount of grousing and gone to such lengths to almost pander to the actor. I mean, Cubby was very loyal. I mean, most evidently with Roger Moore, he couldn't let Roger Moore go for various reasons. Obviously, you had the thing in '83 with Never Say Never Again, and then obviously Roger Moore was proven box office gold in the role. He didn't want to let that go. But when the time came and it was finally time to do it, then we moved on, and that was it. I don't think that Cubby would have been quite so sentimental about Daniel Craig. But there we are. That's an opinion, nothing more.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I suppose again, following Moore, we had Timothy Dalton in his 2 films. He was signed up for a third one. But then that's when the legal wranglings between Eon and various other people came into play. So we didn't see another Bond for 6 years after License to Kill. There is well-documented stuff about the proposed third film with Timothy Dalton. And again, who knows, would that have been his final film? It's, again, down to speculation. But
it is, but the other issue you had, of course, is with Dalton in particular. We are going on a circuitous route, aren't we?
We are a little bit.
The whole thing with Dalton, of course, was the underperformance of License to Kill. And I think that although Bond was kind of caught between hither and thither in terms of where it stood and the eras, obviously with License to Kill coming out around the same time as the fall of the Berlin Wall, a lot of what had defined the backdrop for Bond was the ground was shifting underfoot. But the simple truth is, Dalton was offering a portrayal of the character that was a little bit too gruff and arguably ahead of its time. I mean, that's something that has always made me laugh, and it's something I alluded to when we reviewed License to Kill on Janus, that for all the credit that the approach that Daniel Craig has to the violence and having a kind of a very deliberate grittiness to his interpretation, that was something that Timothy Dalton had in spades. But that was in the late '80s, and that was right after Roger Moore. And it was too soon. Dalton was the right man at the wrong time, I think, in many respects.
Quite an extreme juxtaposition.
Yes, it was. It was about as stark as you could possibly get, and that did Timothy Dalton no favors whatsoever. And it is one of those things that if you sort of take a little bit of time to speculate on things and you think to yourself, oh well, what might have been? I know you hold Timothy Dalton in the highest regard, Tom, and I don't. I can understand why. I mean, he's perfect in all the vital ways, except for the one way in which Roger Moore was beyond perfection, and that only serves to further drive home the point we're making here, and that is that it is the most pronounced juxtaposition that you could possibly have.
Yes,
and it played a massive role in why Dalton had not been really truly accepted in the role, even after doing 2 films.
And many would say that was the starting, as you say, that was the starting point of this, leaner, meaner, Bond who bleeds kind of aspect, which I would argue to an extent continued into the Pierce Brosnan era. I hold Brosnan very high on the list in terms of, I think he could encapsulate all of his predecessors into one whole, and I think again, that's down for debate in a way that maybe Daniel Craig. He literally just ripped up the rule book.
I think so. I completely agree with that. I think that Bond had to be rewritten around Daniel Craig, whereas Pierce Brosnan, there's an argument that could be made that Pierce Brosnan was the most immaculately formed James Bond. I mean, you look at the way he just breezes into GoldenEye. I mean, GoldenEye had all the advantages: the great theme, the great director, great story. It's absolutely outstanding. It had all that going for it, regardless of the actor portraying Bond. But and this is interesting because one of the films I watched after watching No Time to Die, because obviously you watch a new Bond film, it tends to put you in the mood to watch a whole lot more. So one of the films I watched was GoldenEye, because I realized I haven't watched it for a while. And when you look at any of the Daniel Craig films, and they're so invested in the broader tapestry of their story, and they're so serious and so obsessed with a scale of drama, almost seeking credibility. And then you watch GoldenEye, and it is just this glorious, fully formed James Bond, completely confident, but not swaggering in a brazen manner, just totally comfortable. And it's like a breath of fresh air. You know, you look at GoldenEye now, and that's not to say that I am saying that it's better, quote unquote, than the best Daniel Craig Bond films. I just think that GoldenEye is arguably the summation of what a classic Bond film can be. And it's even more extraordinary when you think that was Pierce Brosnan's first outing as Bond. But it was a fully formed, nigh on perfect film, first time out, which is remarkable.
Again, you know, with Brosnan, he was due to do a fifth, and then Barbara and Michael wanted to change tack, and how that went down is still a little slightly a bit of a mystery.
Let's cut through it, shall we? Pierce Brosnan was the first man to really essentially be fired. Yeah, because he was. You know, he dresses it up. He's a lovely human being, and when he's talked about it, admittedly in enemy territory in documentaries bought and paid for by Eon, but the fact is, by Eon rather, but he has talked about it, and he's always been extremely polite. But to put not too fine a point on it, he was fired.
Yeah.
They wanted to go in this other direction. They would argue that became formed around Daniel Craig and that it worked. And again, the argument is always comes down to money, and Craig has been a proven box office attraction in the role. So you can't argue with that. But the manner in which Pierce Brosnan was treated was pretty damn shabby, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you know, as you say, for all the sugarcoating, he might self-preservation in interviews.
Yeah, he was sacked.
Yeah, yeah. So we move on then to the Daniel Craig era. And going back to what you're saying about the Daniel Craig era having this need to have a sort of continuous narrative of some description, one gets the impression that wasn't fully thought through as they started. Obviously, there were issues with the rights to the Spectre organisation.
That's the issue that overshadowed Quantum of Solace enormously.
Yeah.
Because they rolled the dice with that. I think they honestly thought they were going to be able to use it, that some sort of agreement had been reached or would be reached. And they thought, right, we're going to go with this. And then, of course, it didn't pan out like they wanted it to. So you got the underwhelming suggestion of this organization called Quantum, which everybody's already forgotten about.
Yes.
And when you see Inspector Blofeld's Rogue Gallery, I had to laugh as well that basically everybody's trying to pretend that Quantum of Solace didn't happen, even him.
Yes, absolutely.
But the fact is, it was a film that didn't work. And the early rhythms of Daniel Craig's story, as we might very well choose to term it, were hamstrung by that desperate desire to resurrect Spectre in the official canon, and not being able to do that.
And so basically ignored in Skyfall.
And that leads, I just want to say there as well that really the decision to try and work the Silver character into the whole sort of tapestry of Spectre was a really foolish one, because for me, Skyfall was kind of Daniel Craig's Goldfinger.
Yeah.
Because you had, for Connery, you had Goldfinger right in the middle of everything that was going on with the continuous links to Spectre, and Goldfinger was unrelated.
Yes.
And it was its own story. It was iconic for reasons, too numerous and too well known to necessarily talk about again. But it was a film amidst other films, and it was splendid. It didn't need to be tied into Spectre. It wasn't necessary. And in terms of tying things into the broader Spectre story, you didn't need to tie Skyfall into it. Skyfall was something different. It was a more personal, more intimate piece in various ways. And I felt in some respects that retrospective linkage cheapened a lot of Skyfall, just for no real reason, for the sake of being visually profound.
Yeah. Which leads us really very neatly and very succinctly, I might say, to No Time to Die, which as we've established carries a lot of narrative baggage.
Good Lord, yeah.
You know, with bearing all that in mind, we have another mention of Vesper Lind, who of course was his love interest in Casino Royale.
The great lost love in many respects.
Yes, I mean, yeah, absolutely, and that's all within the pre-title sequence. You know, this kind of idea that he's still missing her, he's still obviously, you know, grieving for her all this time later. But
I think it's the concept of regret as well. I think it's not as straightforward as just missing someone you loved. I think it's also tinged by that sense of looking back on it, and you know, he was young and full of piss and vinegar and angry. And when you look at the wish he kind of makes, the little thing he writes down on the piece of paper, he's asking for forgiveness.
Yeah,
I like that. I thought that was very tastefully done, and I rather liked the melancholy side of it, which is what made the then kicking off into the action side of things. I mean, it was very well done. But it almost kind of spoiled that a little bit, because it was kind of sort of serene in a melancholy sort of way.
Almost the necessity to go into an action sequence.
Yeah.
I have to say, and this is where I'm very interested to hear how our opinions differ, I really like No Time to Die. I think it does what it can, as I say, with the narrative baggage, and it does it in the best way that it can, I think. Very, very nicely directed by Cary Fukunaga. And also, I suppose, Cary Fukunaga is the first director to have a screenwriting credit as well on a Bond film.
Yeah, which in itself can be interesting, because obviously it tends to indicate a more intimate involvement in the overall story and the way that things are going to play out on the page as well as on the screen. So it's an interesting aside, that.
Of course, he had a writing credit on the first recent It film.
Yeah,
and that kind of struck a chord with me. I'd forgotten that until I remembered it again. But basically, you know, you think about the opening sequence of No Time to Die. It plays on those horror tropes, being pursued. You know, that kind of intensity rising.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah,
I haven't really thought of it like that, but I think there's
that's sort of it's Rami Malek's character Safin. We are introduced to him pretty much from the off, almost as a sort of Michael Myers kind of figure, you know, in that sort of sense.
The masked stalker, but what's obviously, you see it coming, which is a little bit different. I mean, you don't necessarily in classic horror films, but the way he's presented from a iconographic standpoint, it's designed to be very memorable, very vivid, and it works. I mean, it catches your eye straight away. And the scene is interesting because it seems unrelated to anything that you are expecting in terms of the flashback in time. Obviously, if you put the dots together in terms of a story that is told in Spectre, then it becomes clear what it is. But at the time, you may not necessarily link that, and it does seem to be quite bizarre, quite off kilter.
It's very unusual. I can't think of another.
It's a Bond film that begins with a scary chap in a mask stalking a mother and her child.
Yes.
That's basically a horror film 101 scenario, as it reads, as I say it there.
Yeah.
So it is a fresh approach.
I want to go back to Daniel Craig. I do think it is his absolute finest hour in the role as Bond. I think it supersedes everything he's done up to this point, just because he seems just so into it. He is just absolutely 100% on board with the project, on board with the story. Obviously, we might come to plot inconsistencies, but that's slightly different to story, I suppose.
It is, yes.
I was kind of converted a little bit after my sort of reticence to acknowledge that he was coming back one last time, keeping everybody waiting. I actually think, okay, well, I'm glad you did, because it feels like a true send off.
I do feel that he gives a really committed performance. You know, it's the most engaged he's looked with it for a while, the most comfortable, and I do think that there's definitely some merit to the suggestion that it's because he is so committed to the way this film is going to play out.
Yeah.
I also think as well that it's worth noting that he's been in the role for 15 years, and physically he's a bit like Connery. He's kind of ageless from a physical standpoint. He's still completely convincing now, as he was in Casino Royale.
Yeah.
And that is to his credit. I mean, you still buy him holding his own in whatever he's doing. He does look a bit rough around the edges now and a bit more grizzled perhaps, but physically he's still entirely convincing. And the one of the strengths of No Time to Die is definitely Daniel Craig's performance. He kind of brings all the various aspects that we've come to associate with his Bond, that kind of cynicism, the leering edge that he has sometimes. I mean, his initial interaction with Lashana Lynch's new 007, and I don't think that's a spoiler for anyone, but there we are. I thoroughly enjoyed the snap, crackle, and pop of the dialogue there between those two, because far from being petty, I mean, Craig just almost rolls his eyes at her, and I think that's the perfect reaction. I mean, he's in the situation where he's like, well, of course, carried on. I mean, she questions whether or not he secretly thinks that they retire the number, and maybe Bond did, but the way he handles it is entirely believable. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think another strength of the film is those supporting characters. Obviously we have the return of Ralph Fiennes, Ben Whishaw, Naomi Harris as MQ and Moneypenny respectively. Again, whoever first cast those people in those roles deserves plaudits. I'm sure Sam Mendes had a lot to do with it.
I expect so.
Seeing them back is just great. It's the old team back, and of course we have a fleeting performance or fleeting appearance by Ana de Armas as Paloma, as a sort of another agent who gets involved.
To be honest with you, I'm not even sure why they bothered giving her a name. Because I mean, she's barely there, and it's a shame because she's very talented, very tenacious in the way she I remember her in Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
And she's playing a very difficult role where she's kind of literal for the central character, Ryan Gosling's Kay, the central and protagonist of that film. But in many other respects, she's kind of a figment for him, and that's it. And it's a very, very difficult role to pull off. I can't really explain it, and if you haven't already seen the film. But it's a complex role, and it kind of combines vulnerability and sexuality, and it's splendid. I mean, it really was an impressive performance, and I was very keen to see her deployed in the context of this film, and obviously being although we tend to consider this term rather reductive now, a Bond girl.
Yeah.
But I feel they made the most of her while she's there. She has excellent chemistry with Daniel Craig almost immediately. And that's doubly disappointing because Daniel Craig's reluctance to kind of involve himself in the affairs of Roger, shall we say, has kind of been a defining trait of his Bond. And yet watching him in concert with her, I wanted to see more.
Yes.
And we don't get it, and I don't even know why. In some respects, I don't know why they bother. It's a glorified cameo.
Yeah,
it's a shame, really.
It is a shame. And you feel there is a big lost opportunity there. But it's joyous for the 10 minutes or so that she is on the screen.
Not fun, but I think the root of my I don't want to use the word issue, but the root of my, shall we say, critical observations with regards to No Time to Die, because obviously the film is extremely long and it likes to take its time over everything that it's doing. And I think it's about momentum. We establish from what we've said that Daniel Craig's enjoying it. He's getting into it. And when he gets back in the swing of things and everything, does the classic Bond film of tying up all the loose ends, and he gets to go back and be Bond again. And you feel like the film is, and obviously the Ana de Armas thing, you got the real momentum going. Just enjoying Craig being Bond, and then boom, hits a brick wall, and that's layers to do.
Right. Okay.
Every time, obviously, the opening scene aside, which obviously is necessary to set the scene for where we are in No Time to Die, and also to further any loose ends from Spectre. That's fine. I mean, you have to set it up that way. But I find that the momentum of the film comes crashing to a halt when you reintroduce that character, and it only gets worse when you realise what her being back signifies. The revelation of her child and the entirely transparent attempt to hide the fact that that isn't baby Bond, and everything that signifies, everything that means. For me, I just don't think you need it. I was really enjoying the film, and by that point, we'd had the first shocking death as well, which obviously is Paul Felix. But that was beautifully done. It was simple and abrupt, and sort of had an almost poetic quality to it. And it was entirely as you'd like it to be. It was poignant. It worked.
Yeah.
But there was so much momentum in the film. It was all coming nicely to the boil, and then she's back, and it all just suddenly turns into this occasionally turgid drama. And it's like, all I want is it to be a Bond film to almost look like it's enjoying itself. And it's almost like, oh, no, I've enjoyed myself. I better use the drama to resume flagellating myself now because, how dare I enjoy myself? You know, that's how it seems sometimes. Just so unwilling to admit that it was having fun, the film. So it's like, oh, we've got to go back to the high drama.
But I think a lot of that goes into that idea of chemistry as well.
Yeah.
Because, the chemistry between Daniel Craig and Léa Seydoux has always been a bit of a head scratcher. There doesn't really appear to be any, and that was apparent in Spectre. But I think it's highlighted and spotlighted in No Time to Die because so much of the story is around their relationship and
yeah. This woman is supposed to be the love of Bond's life and supposed to be the center of his universe and all the other cliches you want to trot out.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to accept that when you look at Daniel Craig and Léa Seydoux and you talk about chemistry. They have some, but not a lot. And that's because she's just got that fundamental aloofness that makes it difficult to like her.
Yeah.
Find love her, you find it difficult to like her. And then you for a point of reference, you look at the way that Daniel Craig and is introduced to Vesper Lynd in Casino Royale.
The train.
On the train.
Yeah.
Where she just sits down, boom, I'm the money, every penny. And it's like, that's got more energy, more sort of charisma, more sizzle than, pretty much anything that goes on. And again, I think the major part of it is the fundamental chemistry that exists between the actors. But I also think it's the way that the characters are written, particularly Léa Seydoux, who just seems to be so sad all the time.
Yeah.
I would like to say that, because we touched on the subject of Rami Malek with Safin. And I mean, from the way he's introduced is very, very interesting. Very, as I use the term vivid, it most certainly is. And when the character is, he's introduced in stages, you get little snapshots. It's almost like he's stalking the film. And when he eventually comes to the fore, it's a lovely character. It's very, very interesting. He's quite softly spoken, almost effete in the way he carries himself. And he has a quiet, controlled menace.
Absolutely.
And there's just little things where in the dialogue where when they have their confrontation where they're sat down and Bond pushes him a little bit and he just snaps just a little, just reveals that there's anger beneath the control. It's all beautifully done. It works really, really well. And the whole concept of the Safin character is fascinating, but he is not given the room to breathe. And that is all largely, I should say, down to the film's overemphasis on, again, Daniel Craig and Léa Seydoux.
Yeah, it's a great villainous character that is in the wrong film almost. It's
not allowed to breathe, not allowed to be the central part of a film when he clearly deserves to be.
Yeah, it particularly, as you say, he is the first person we see in the film, and yet following the opening sequence, the pre-credit sequence, we don't see him again until maybe 2/3 into the film.
Yeah,
it feels like you're talking about momentum, but it feels like the momentum for his character is just just stops and isn't picked up again until towards the end of the film, which again feels like a bit of a missed opportunity, because you've got someone like Rami Malek who is capable of much more than he is given.
Yeah. He makes gold with every opportunity he gets.
Yeah,
it's a lovely performance. I loved the Safin villain, which made it all the more disappointing that in the end you don't get to see more of it. And that's not necessarily wanting to see more than you should. That's just wanting to see what you should. And I have to say, as we're in spoiler territory, I did thoroughly enjoy the way that he meets his end, where Bond just merrily executes him. That is that smacked of highest Connery, like executing Matey Boy and Doctor No.
Yeah,
Strangways. He goes in and Bond holds him up and he goes, "That's a Smith and Wesson, and you've had your 6," and just shoots him. And it's like, that's great.
Walk away, don't look back.
Yeah, blow his brains out and carry on. That was really good. Yeah. I enjoyed that.
I suppose another criticism that the film has had regarding the Safin character is his motivation, the reason that he is the way he is, which it feels a bit muddied, I suppose, in the narrative sense. And obviously they're quite topical to the sort of the global virus that he wants to send out across the world and everything and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, MacGuffin 19 in this case.
Well, exactly. but in the sense of why? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
And I suppose there isn't, but as you say, again, going back to the reliance on continuing the Daniel Craig Lea Seydoux storyline, we're not given that villainous story to hold on to. It's just he comes back into the film again because he has that connection with Madeline, Lea Seydoux's character, and then all of a sudden it's viruses and poison gardens and proper James Bond territory. And I can see where people are coming from with that. I don't think it particularly matters in the moment when you're watching the film.
No.
But when you reflect on it, you think, well, actually, what is his issue? What is his problem?
He's sold short because really the film should be about him, and it isn't about him. In the end, it's mostly about Lea Seydoux.
Yeah,
when you want to get down to it, I mean, she's the key to everything.
The least interesting character.
Yeah, and Safin's obsessed with her. The brief scene we have with Blofeld, where Christoph Waltz can scarcely be asked, but then he's not being asked to do a lot. So that was a bit of an undercooked disappointment as well. They build that up in the trailer like it's going to be the whole Hannibal Lecter thing.
Well, I was thinking more Hannibal Spectre.
Well, we love a pun, don't we?
There we go.
Full marks for that. That works. It's funny when you kind of get caught up in the moment. This is the danger of watching a Bond film in the cinema, I think, as well, is that you get swept up by it.
Yeah.
And as long as you get the broad strokes right, which they invariably do, you can be a bit dazzled by it all. And there's some really good razzle dazzle in effect in this film, and some of the callbacks to older Bond films are very, very elegant. I mean, you get it straight away with the Hans Zimmer working melody from "We Have All the Time in the World" into it, and that becoming more important later on. And then you pointed out to me as well about the use of On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah. And
then, of course, in terms of the cars, you get, and I mean, I absolutely love this. We get to see the V8 Vantage.
Yeah.
Which is a car we haven't seen since it was blown up, strangely enough.
Yes.
In The Living Daylights. So evidently, Q put that one back.
Well, exactly. Well. I mean, he's obviously got his favourites. Interestingly, what you're saying about, just sort of jumping back a little bit about, you were saying you watched GoldenEye after seeing No Time to Die. The film that I felt the need to watch was The Living Daylights, but mainly to see the Vantage in all its glory again. But that was just by the by, really.
The Vantage and its optional extras.
Exactly. Yes. Amazing, this modern safety glass. But but absolutely, I think that's when looking back over the history of the series is done right. Not in the sort of Die Another Day sense where you just shove everything on the screen and hope people notice it, put it right up in front of the screen and say, look at this, we've got this from this film and we've got this from this film.
Somebody over the cranium with it.
Exactly,
That's not the way to do it.
And I think when Bond looks back on its history, it also needs to have one foot looking into the future, looking into what's coming up. And I think
it's an excellent segue coming up here. Yeah,
well, exactly. I think Skyfall did it well, and I think this film kind of gets it right, but in a very divisive way, let's say.
Yeah, because in terms of looking to the future, I don't see a future. And that was the thing that bothered me the most, because I would describe myself at the end of this film as quite emotional in the way that it was done, particularly the use of We Have All the Time in the World, because that song means so much. And it's nice for people to be reminded that that song's first duty is always to the Bond series.
Yes.
That meant a great deal. But I was somewhat crestfallen, to be honest with you, at the end of it, because I sat, and I think you did the same, I sat all the way through the credits because I needed to see James Bond Will Return, just because I needed to see it. But when I actually move away from that essential impulse, I don't see how. You know, it's all well and good saying it, but the finale of this film, and again, let's just say it, James Bond dies. Literally dies, is blown up at the end of this film.
Yeah.
The first Bond to die on screen, and it's a bold choice. I imagine there's a few people out there with vested interest to the negative of the Bond series who'd argue that it's a necessary choice, whatever, they don't matter. It's a difficult decision, and one that has painted the Bond series into a very peculiar hole that I do not see any real way of extricating, any obvious way of extricating oneself from. I mean, really, what the hell do you do? Where do you go from here? Your choice is either to bin everything that we've just seen for the last 15 years and reset everything and just carry on, or you go down the route, the more meta option, which is what a lot of people have been trying to sort of suggest, well, you know, the James Bond thing and the persona and the name, just a code name. And it's like, well, that's an excuse. That's a justification that people with limited imaginations, or people who can't accept they can just go with a thing, they need explanations. You know, I personally, I don't care. It's not important. The film is what's important. And using that logic, the ending to No Time to Die is crazy, because where the hell do you go? What can you possibly do after the end of that film? That's my biggest issue. That was the only thing that was really gnawing at me straight away. I mean, what the bloody hell do you do? Where do you go after you do something like that?
I suppose it links back into this idea of it being the culmination of the Daniel Craig era and nothing else.
In a series, like we said.
How it's standalone. Yeah. So it's almost saying these films aren't part of that old series. These films are in their own sort of category.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, and that could work, I suppose.
Yeah, as you said about, you know, regarding Barbara Broccoli and her sort of commitment to having Daniel Craig in the role, you kind of get that impression that it's like, this is for the benefit of our lead actor, to give him something, this big send-off, and literally kill him off on screen because of the emotional interest or vested interest that the audience have built up over the last 15 years. I'm just, you know, thinking of the kind of things, the kind of discussions that may have happened around the boardroom table at Eon. I remember saying to you the other day, whether they have a plan, whether they have, you know, something in mind to continue, or to what the next stage is. And I remember you saying you didn't necessarily think that they would.
I'm not sure that, I said to you, it's almost like Barbara Broccoli is in thrall to Daniel Craig. And I'm not entirely convinced that they do necessarily have a plan. I think they probably have something they call a plan, but to know whether that will work, I mean, they've gone so completely all in with it that you've got so many factors. I mean, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to watch that film who are not invested in the Bond canon. Yeah. Who are going to look at that and think, well, that must be the end of James Bond then. And then when they subsequently do find a way of doing it and release a new Bond film, then it's going to be cheaper. And it's going to be, oh, well, they must have changed their mind then. You know, it runs the risk of diminishing everything that comes, of everything that came before and everything that comes afterwards. And now this is the thing I was going to put to you. If you could have stood in 2005, 2006, and you could have looked 15, 16 years into the future, and you could have seen the way the Daniel Craig films were going to end up, Personally, if I had had that opportunity, I would have said fire him on the spot and do something else.
Right.
Because I wouldn't have wanted to do that. I just think that it risks way too much. And it's created a situation where the Bond series has expanded itself in various credible and dramatic ways, but it's also lost a lot of itself. You know, the joie de vivre, the sense of fun. And I know some people would say that, oh, well, that was necessary because where does James Bond fit into the modern world? And it's like, well, that's an interesting point, but the Bond films are, in essence, they are escapism. You know, they can be gritty if they want to be, but they walk a very fine line. And if you do that correctly, then they become timeless. I mean, that's the other thing about GoldenEye. That is a film that very much meditates on the end of the Cold War, because that's the first Bond film post the Cold War. So that arguably places it in a particular period in history. But aside from that sort of necessary discussion, the ebb and flow of the film, the themes, the way it's conveyed, the relationships, the dynamics, everything that's essential to the core of that film is outside of time. You know, certain sensibilities affect the way you go about certain things. I mean, that's inevitable. Some of it's bordering on positive. Most of it is probably completely negative. But that's another discussion for another time. But GoldenEye, when you look at it, the essential essence of that film, the soul of that film, is outside of time. So why do you need to worry about, you know, such issues? You don't. The sort of people who say, well, where does James Bond fit into this world, are the sort of people who wouldn't go anywhere near, don't actually watch Bond films, have got no investment in the canon, have no interest in its history, don't see any positive in it. They just make sweeping assumptions. If you spend too much time listening to people like that, and I think that's part, I suppose in many respects, that sums it up for me with No Time to Die, that there are many sweet and cute little nods in that film to make it seem like it's a Bond film for Bond fans. But in the end, it's a Bond film that has been made in some respects for non-Bond fans. And it's more interested in how it's perceived by those whose opinions are not going to really do much to its bottom line than it is about the people who will always be supporting it, who will always be there. That's the way it feels to me sometimes, that it's almost a Bond film that started to believe its own hype in a serious sense.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary. But the point is, something that's been around for more than half a century, why should it concern itself with the whims of people who don't care about it? And I suppose that if I have an issue with No Time to Die, that's probably the simplest way of summing it up, that I just feel that is a film that, I don't know, does it have some kind of self-confidence issue? The way it's made, you know, is it wanting to appeal to people who otherwise really don't care about James Bond instead of just being a good Bond film? But then I don't just think it's No Time to Die. I think that arguably all of Daniel Craig's Bond films are a bit like that. They almost seem to want to be the antidote to the Bond question. I don't see a question personally, but then maybe I'm just too biased to see it. I don't know.
No, I think that's a very interesting point. Going back to what you said about a while back about it needs to be about the film, I don't see as much of an issue as you do in the things that you said, but I think my issue would be it's become more about the lead actor, more about the person playing the role than it has about the film. And I think going back to your question about, you know, if I could look into the future in 15 years and, you know, that would be my thing is, the films have become about Daniel Craig rather than forging their own path and continuing, as you say, this legacy of 60 years, at least cinematically, and walking into a bit of a cul-de-sac and kind of, where do we go next? It almost feels like they are kind of ripping out all the pages and saying, right, are they just going to start again? Are they going to start remaking stories from, you know, 60s? And also going back to what you said about sort of pandering to people that don't really care about the series, it's interesting because it feels like if they are trying to make a Bond film for people who aren't Bond fans, are they trying to do that in order to get more fans? And if they are, then they've gone about it an interesting way by killing off the lead character. And I think a lot of it comes down to the trajectory that Casino Royale started and the sort of, I don't know if you would call it an inevitable conclusion, but, you know, it certainly forged its own path in that sense and gone in this direction that has resulted in in what they've done at the end of this film.
I think there's almost a popular obsession with the bleak in some respects. I mean, you've seen it in many long-standing franchises. I mean, you've seen it in, obviously we're talking about it here in James Bond, but I would use Doctor Who, and I would use to an even greater extent Star Trek.
Yeah.
Where these were shows, particularly Star Trek, that were defined by a fundamental optimism. And you'd say with Bond, there was a commitment to escapism, to joy, to being fun often in an overtly masculine and rather silly way. But they were inoffensive to those who are not unrelentingly precious. And yet, over the last sort of 10 years, everything has been touched by this need to be dramatic and bleak and unrelenting. And I'm sure that someone would argue, well, that's the way the world is. But then that's an absurd argument, because what's the point of escapism then? Why, when you've got the power to create something? Roger Moore's the greatest example. I remember I said this to you a good few years ago, where you had it at various points in the Daniel Craig films. They'd wrap up yet another heavily invested emotional drama starring Daniel Craig. And I'd be like, well, that's great. And I enjoyed it. It's a great film. Lots of flourishes that are worth the name Bond. But could we have just a straightforward, detached Bond adventure now?
Mm.
Could we just have a fun film which is born, lives, and dies in one film, in one running time? With Roger Moore, you had 7 films, and every single one of them followed that same formula. It all sorted itself out over the course of one running time. 7 separate films.
Mm.
And it's like, I'm not saying that is the absolute right way to go. I mean, you could have done a different approach with the films if you wanted to. But there was a greater sense of what a Bond film was, I suppose, in those days. I suppose my central question, my central observation would be that, is it worth potentially risking the well-being, if not the outright existence, of the most venerated series in all of Hollywood, in all of filmmaking, in all of it's a pop culture expression. I can't even find the right way to fully sum it up, but it's something that is a part of the fabric of popular culture, and it transcends the people who look after it, the people who watch it, and most definitely the people who are charged with bringing it to life. It's bigger than the sum of its parts. Is it worth risking that just to sate the creative aspirations of one actor? Personally, I enjoyed Daniel Craig. I thought he was great in Casino Royale. He was very good in Skyfall. He was fine in the others, but I mean, in Spectre, you could tell he wasn't particularly happy. He was much more on the ball in this one. But personally, I'm glad we're done. I'm absolutely delighted. I just want to move on with it. Yeah, because I'm fed up with it. The circus surrounding him and his wishes and his whims and all of this, and it's like, crying out loud. How much money did they pay him for No Time to Die? 20 million?
Yeah. I have
his ego a little.
Yeah, one of my friends suggested that one of the reasons he came back was the wheelbarrow loads of cash that came up his driveway. I suppose it's really a case of we wait and see. We wait and see what comes next.
If anything comes next.
Yeah, well, that's the question.
I'm having a bit of fun. Of course, something will come. But in what form and to what extent? And I mean, this is, I suppose, again, this is further to the point I've just made. We shouldn't be in a situation where we have to speculate about the very foundation of the bloody thing. We should just know. We should think, oh yeah, well, it'll be fun to see who's going to do what with it next. But instead, they have absolutely blown everything up, thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and now we're in a situation where we simply don't know anything. We've got a little the legendary tagline at the end of almost every Bond film: James Bond will return. That's the one thing we're clutching at.
Yes.
But beyond that, what do we know? Yeah. Absolutely sod all.
Yeah. In what format? In what? Yeah.
Yeah. In what way? With what disposition? What configuration? It is complete lunacy. Those choices overshadow No Time to Die, because I enjoyed No Time to Die. In all seriousness, I enjoyed it. I thought that it hit more often than it missed.
Yeah.
I thought it was, as you say, Daniel Craig was thoroughly engaged and gave a really good performance. Everybody who was in it was doing their job, was good fun, or was what they needed to be. Despite all the various fears, Lashana Lynch's 007 was surprisingly restrained and likable. And there is some suggestion that the reshoots that were done in the downtime involving the pandemic and whatnot, that her character received some attention, shall we say, to make her slightly less en vogue when it comes to the disposition of a character like that. And if that's true, then that was the right decision. But the film works, but its emphasis is in the wrong place. It should have all been on the straightforward narrative and Rami Malek, Safin, and instead it's Bond having Daniel Craig's Bond having his 8th midlife crisis.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a film where he remains in the service. We have the famous last line of Quantum of Solace, "I never left." It's like, are you sure?
You say it's a running joke. He leaves in every single film only to come back.
Yeah. I think in general, I think I probably enjoyed No Time to Die a little bit more than you did, and those bigger issues that you mentioned didn't bother me as much. Certainly in the moment, I think it is one of those films where in the moment, like you've said, you just buy it, you go with it. And maybe it's only afterwards that you start thinking, perhaps. But the issue that I had, as I say, was mainly plot related more than anything else. As I say, the Safin character and the sort of short-changedness of that. And the ending has the desired impact. Yes, it raises more questions than it answers.
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
At the end of that film, I was distraught. I didn't really want to speak. I just sat in my chair, staring hard at the screen, and almost immediately wanting to see those words that we've already mentioned, because it seemed so utterly definitive, so absolute, and I couldn't really process what I was seeing, because I never in my wildest dreams believed that they would go that far, simply because of what it potentially means. The scale of the task, the Pandora's box that has now been opened. All I can say is they've taken an almighty risk, and the kind of straightforward quality of No Time to Die is completely overshadowed by the choices that have been made and the ramifications of those choices, because the course is set now, and if it goes wrong, then the Bond series could go with it. And as I say, was it worth it just so that Daniel Craig could have his dramatic finale? Yeah. I'm not sure it was. I suppose that's the essence of it. I'm not sure it was, and I hope very much that history vindicates Craig in that he gets it and the series carries on and everybody can be happy and we all live happily ever after. There we go. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. But I will be worried about it. I will be staring at it. I will be pondering. I will be obsessed until such time as we know definitively. Because that was the thing. I was looking at this black screen at the end of this film and thinking, this is what the end feels like. Where do we go? You do that, and you certainly get people invested in the end of that film. That's an excellent thing to do in terms of heightening the emotional impact of it. But it's almost like a form of bait and switch. You set it up in such a way as, it's over. And you add to that, obviously, the fact that Daniel Craig's Bond has died. And then it's like, it's the greatest emotional impact ever. And then the various people, Craig et al., they will say, you feel that way because of the end of my Bond. It's like, it doesn't have anything to do with you, pal.
Yeah.
It's to do with the series.
Yeah.
It's to do with looking at that and thinking, well, where do we go from here? It's hard for me to really objectively assess No Time to Die beyond the kind of mechanical and material. When I know what it potentially signifies. And even if we are being somewhat melodramatic, and even if they are just going to try and do the old tickety-boo carry on, it's still going to be a damn difficult thing to do. The greatest challenge that the Bond series has arguably ever faced, certainly the greatest challenge since Connery really, truly, definitely walked away all the way to the early 70s. So,
well, I suppose the next thing we may well hear will be the announcement of who might be taking over, etc. So that's the exciting part, I suppose, of the future. There's always, who's it going to be? It's like when when the new Doctor is cast, in Doctor Who, it's who's it going to be, sort of thing. And so I'm looking forward to that, because that will at least hint at the direction that the series is going in, but I don't suppose we will find that out for a while.
No, I don't suppose we will. And as I said to you, I've got 2 words with regards to the casting of the next James Bond. Quite simply, remember Fleming. Remember that at the start of that film, any of those films, it's Ian Fleming's James Bond 007.
Yeah.
Barbara Broccoli has promised that she will keep that foremost in mind. Let's see that she does, because she only has to look and see at what other storied franchises they've tried to go the radical route, and it's blown up directly in their faces.
Yeah.
So please don't do that. Just give us someone who fulfills the archetype, and let's hope we can carry on.
I feel that brings us nicely full circle.
Yes.
Back round to Fleming, where it all started. Well, thank you for listening to our podcast. It's lovely to be back, and we hope you've enjoyed what we've had to say. It'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on the film as well. If you want to comment on our YouTube channel, or sign up to our website or our Facebook page or our Twitter account, all those avenues that you can contact us on. It'd be lovely to hear from you guys and what you think, and do you agree, do you completely disagree, and I'm sure we will be back again. That's our podcast. Bye.
Bye-bye.